Welcome to Ironclad's quarterly webinar on all things legal leadership. I am Ironclad's General Counsel. My name is Jasmine Singh, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Mickey Newt and Melissa Pham for today's session, which is focused on finding your career path in-house. I'm so thrilled that Mickey and Melissa in particular joined us for this panel because they have such inspiring and amazing career paths. And before we dive into the substance, I'm going to ask them to just introduce themselves and share a little bit more about who they are and what they do. Mickey, let's turn it to you to start.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Mickey Newt, Associate General Counsel and Head of Legal Strategy and Operations at Pure Storage, which is an enterprise data management services company.
Melissa, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Pham, and I'm Chief of Staff to the Chief Legal Officer at Intel. I've been here about 6 years, and in my role, I sort of cover a lot of things. I lead communications, both sort of internal to our department and external. I help define and navigate our organization's priorities, identify operational gaps, and I lead special projects and initiatives. Also, of course, fostering relationships across our team and our leadership. Prior to that, I was in private practice at a large law firm for several years, practicing antitrust and commercial litigation.
Amazing. Thank you again to both of you for being willing to join us and lend your expertise and your stories. I think they're going to be incredibly valuable for all the folks we have attending today. As a reminder, if you've got questions throughout the panel, you are welcome to drop them in the chat. We will take them in turn, some of which we'll take during the course of the panel. Others we'll wait until the end just to not disrupt the flow. But where I wanted to start is actually maybe not where you would think, which is around reinvention in particular. And the reason for that is because from the outside, oftentimes what happens, especially when you're scrolling LinkedIn, it can appear as though people's career paths are pretty linear. Like on paper, it looks like they went from one place to the next and they had a ladder and they rose through the ranks, or their next step kind of made sense. That's, I think, one bucket of a story. The other can be a really shocking story. Like one day you are a bankruptcy attorney and then the next day you're a founder of a company, right? But what nobody knows is the story that took one person from one place in that, progression to the next. And I think the stories between those moves are actually so important to share, not just because they expose where the struggles are, which are important, I think, sometimes to make sure we're communicating about, but also because they are the places where we glean the lessons learned, right? They are the things that allow us to understand how we moved from one place to another. So that's where I'm going to start this conversation. And Mickey, I'd love to turn it over to you to begin and tell us a little bit about your venture through different functions. In particular, you have done so much intellectual property, R&D, to live in HR, and now tell us a little bit about how you went through that reinvention process and what enabled you to be successful in it.
Well, thanks, Jasmine. Thanks for kicking it off with me. I think my reinvention story actually aligns quite well with the technological evolution in our industry in the Bay Area. I started out at law school doing a lot of music licensing and found my way back up to the Bay Area after law school, and honestly didn't really have a goal other than to be employed as an attorney. And a right place, right time kind of hit with me, where Adobe Systems Incorporated, along with several other kind of tech firms at that time, and I'm going to date myself, at least a couple of decades ago, was hiring lawyers directly in-house. And so I jumped on that opportunity. I hadn't been courted by a law firm at a law school, so this seemed like a really great step. My music licensing aligned at the time with software licensing, and a lot of that law was applied from music to software. So right out the gate, I learned to adapt kind of where the law was to the technology industry in terms of software licensing. I think my personal North Star has always been through curiosity and learning something new. And so as I stepped into that journey with Adobe Systems, I spent my first 15 years of my career there, and was led by and mentored by folks who were very open to giving me the opportunity to learn, which allowed me to go from software licensing, supporting IP, really into deep R&D, working with engineers, and then working with marketing. So I got to touch, from a legal perspective, various areas of the business. And I think primarily that was driven by the curiosity, which the consequence of which was the reinvention.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask for a quick fast forward. How did you get from there to where you are?
Very good. Well, it was through Adobe that I, really kind of set my foundation of my legal career. And I think the curiosity, the reinvention, looking for opportunities to learn and grow within the legal field as it aligned with technology. From at Adobe, I was able to see the evolution of the software as a service, evolution of privacy, evolution of user-generated content. And so, as I got to the end of my 15 years, I realized that I think I had learned about as much as I could professionally, and really wanted to experience other companies. And so started to accelerate the speed with which I moved from company to company. Ended up at Symantec through a divestiture of Veritas. Ended up at Meta, which was Facebook, doing contracts, procurement contracts, and understanding the importance of process and workflow, and engaging and collaborating with procurement, finance, security, IT in the transactional space. And then that landed me here, where Pure Storage was a very small company at the time. They were looking to build their infrastructure. I brought to Pure Storage the skills of developing a team for procurement, data, security, privacy, and building that infrastructure here so that they could accelerate the speed with which they engage with their vendors.
That's amazing. I love that story so much. Melissa, I know you have a similar one, but as is the case for all of our careers, it's very unique. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your journey from starting a law firm to ending up where you are now as chief of staff.
Yeah, it is. Maybe it's a little unique because of where I am right now, but I think it starts off, in a very similar way, in a shape that looks familiar to a lot of folks who are starting out in legal practice. Like many, many other lawyers, I started law firm practice with a super crisp goal in mind, which was partnership, right? And to do that, you have to really be a deep, deep, deep expert in your area. And I think the law firm model really kind of encourages that deep expertise, right? Know this statute, know this wage and hour special rule, become the expert in FRCP, like 23, Rule 23 class certifications, right? And that is absolutely a very valid and proven approach to career development. But I think, for me, what I was finding out in my day-to-day practice, that it just wasn't professionally satisfying for me. I really wanted like more variety. I wanted a different approach to work, one that really kind of engaged me earlier in the process to solve different problems than the ones that I was solving at the firm after the dispute had happened, after the relationship had fallen apart, right? So I really fought it for a while because I had this, laser focus on a goal, and I didn't want to give up the expertise that I had built and the relationships that I had built at the firm, right? It kind of felt like I had to give up something in order to get something different.
Right.
But I had to start kind of paying attention to the kind of work that was energizing to me, right? And then what wasn't, what like just actually felt like work. And the energizing work was just closer to the client, and it got to a point where I just couldn't ignore that anymore. And so I went in-house, and I moved to a totally different area also, because again, kind of listening to internal signals of what is energizing to me and what I was really curious about in the moment. And in cybersecurity and privacy issues were kind of coming to the fore, and I moved into that space in-house. which was new to me, but something super interesting and something I was already dabbling in.
Mhm.
And grew my expertise there. And I will say for folks who are thinking about reinvention, and are you going to lose all of this goodwill and reputation and currency that you've built up at your prior place or in your prior domain? I'll just say that I think expanding into different domains and building additional expertise has really only helped me, right? It's
Right.
only been incremental. It's built up my cross-functional credibility. It's really given me a reputation for solving problems, really, no matter what the shape of the problem. Um,
Mhm.
and I think it's led to being considered for leadership opportunities, right? You're open to more like transformation work or strategy work, right? So it's been a terrific, it's been a story of success, which is great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you both for sharing that. Yeah, I think one of the themes that we're really starting to circle around is like, how do you know when to jump on an opportunity? How do you know that it's the right one to pull you away from maybe what you know or what you're doing or what you're successful at? And I think for a lot of folks in the legal profession in particular, it can be a little hard to think about that reinvention, especially because, as Melissa, you just said, early in our legal careers, that expertise, that specialization is so highly valued. It's what sometimes sets us apart, right, as the sought out resource. And so we can hesitate to look for that opportunity because we think, oh, I should continue to do this because it's the right thing to do for my career. Or that self limiting belief of like, oh, I don't know if I can go do this other thing because I've been doing this, or fear around, well, what if that other thing is something that I don't like because it's unknown? And frankly, it can also be rooted in this conditioning, I think, sometimes for like folks who are like, well, I should just be happy with what I've got and why rock the boat. So I'd love to hear a little bit from each of you when you decide to pick up your head and look around. What makes you make that decision? Or do you live like that, right? Like, what is the forcing function for you to think about? Maybe there's something else out there for me versus I'm just going to stick to what I'm doing. And Mickey, I'm going to ask to start with you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think there's really no one right answer here, because for me, the signal to myself to pick up my head is driven by several factors. It's driven by, have I exhausted all the opportunities for growth where I am? That's a key gating question. One of the other things that is a really gating question is what's going on in my personal life? Where am I in my stage in my personal life? Sometimes it's okay to put your foot on the gas pedal of your career. Sometimes you need to take your foot off the gas pedal and idle for a little bit, depending on your circumstances in your environment. So I think it might sound a little, just simple, but it really is, where are you? Knowing yourself, knowing where you are, knowing your tolerances, your stress tolerances, your balance tolerances. Like there's a very self-reflective exercise that leads you to that. And I think that I would start there. But for me, it's really been, have I exhausted all the opportunities for growth and development? And for me, I was always open to not just the lateral growth, the vertical growth, the horizontal growth. And so when you consider the ideas of growth and development and ask, have I exercised them all? It's not really about, have I exercised my promotion opportunities? It's really like, have I truly, exhausted all of the potential learning possibilities, even if that's a lateral, it seems like a seemingly lateral move.
Right.
But self-reflection and then looking external to your environment.
Yeah, I love that. And Melissa, how do you think about that openness, especially when you have a big job in front of you that likely requires 120% of your attention, right? How do you think about balancing those two things? Or how have you in the past anyway?
Yeah, I mean, that is really, really tough. And I think that's something we all face, right? Like how do we balance making the time for the things that we want to do versus the things that we have to do? But you just have to do it. You really do have to create space for yourself to do this and pick your head up and look around. And maybe that's even scheduling it. Like 30 minutes on a Friday, you're going to, look around at, maybe it's LinkedIn, look around at all of the people that you're looking up to, and the jobs that look really interesting, and the roles and the activities that they're doing. And what is it that is exciting to you about that, right? Give yourself time and space for that self-reflection that Mickey was talking about. I thought that was a really terrific answer, right? And ask those questions like, how engaged am I? Maybe I have a great job and a great role, but maybe I'm not that engaged anymore. And maybe that's a signal to me that I need to, look for something that develops me more, that gives me more room to grow, right? A lot of times people don't want a totally different new job. Maybe they just want a more influential version of something that they're already doing. So, look for those signals and give yourself time and space to kind of translate them. And you don't have to dive into the deep ends, right? Like, you don't have to reinvent yourself overnight. Like, just dip a toe in, right? Like, if you're interested in a new different practice area, you don't have to just take on a case right away, or, apply to move into that area of the department. Like, find those people, talk to them, read what they read, go to those industry events. If you're at a firm, offer to do small things, right? Maybe you're writing the news alert, or you're helping with the pitch. If you're in-house, like, offer to be somebody's vacation coverage, or, we have sabbaticals at Intel, right? It's a terrific opportunity to be somebody's sabbatical coverage. And you're like, oh, this is what product support looks like, or this is what, legal support for Foundry looks like, right? Like, you can really start, experimenting, but you have to give yourself kind of the ability and the space to do that.
Yeah.
And I'd love to add to that, because I am currently right now fighting for that space internally, fighting for that space internally to say, what is next for me, not just professionally, personally. Like, I am always constantly fighting. So that is not it's not an easy thing when you're working so hard and you feel like the list never ends. It really is. You do have to. It's almost like you've got to advocate. You have to fight for yourself and fight for that time. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen automatically. You have to work toward it. I'm right there right now.
Totally. I think I'm gonna add a layer of advice that I got a few years ago, which was, sometimes, especially for those of us that are very achievement oriented and like A+ students that want to do the best possible job, it can be really hard to think about what we want other than that A+, because we have been conditioned to just want that A+, right? But like, how do we want to get that A+? In what environment? And so a few years ago, somebody gave me some advice, and they were like, just write down every night before you go to bed 10 things that you like. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. And then after a few days, I was like, oh dear, I'm running out of things. And this is coming from who has lots of extracurricular activities and interests. And, it just was, I had become so focused, to your point, on that narrow path. And I conditioned myself to believe that actually what I liked the most was the gold star. And, it takes a lot to be able to take, the focus off of that and think, but like, in what environment, and how do I go achieve it, and what do I want to do? And it's actually a nice segue to a question we just got in the chat, which is, did either of you get any pushback when within the company you were at, you were trying to make a transition? Melissa, for you, maybe at Intel, like how did you navigate that? And if not, tell maybe our listeners a little bit about what you did to make sure you set up the stage to not receive that pushback.
Yeah. I will say that, just taking a step back, this is why it is so important that you choose the companies and the people that you work for carefully, right? Mm-hmm. And I was so, Intel is a place where you can be there for 20 years and have 5 different careers. Like, they really encourage, right, growth and career development, even if that means, right, trying something new, going somewhere else. You can have a ton of different careers within the same company, which is amazing. And then on top of that, right, like having a manager that really supports your growth. Like, my manager was helping drive discussions with me, like, okay, like you've been doing this for 6 months. What do you want to do in the next 6 months? Where do you see yourself next year? Really keeping, an ear to the ground on like, these are opportunities that I think would be terrific for you, that would like, put another tool in your toolbox, right? Like help you develop. So it's so important to surround yourself, like create an environment for yourself that is really open to, curiosity and development, even if it's in different directions than what you initially were going on. So I would say that I've been so privileged and so grateful for this environment internally. And when the opportunity, like like I said, I'd started in antitrust and litigation, and I was given the opportunity now to like lead our product assurance and security at Intel. And that was a huge opportunity, right? And it was a lot of trust and faith in my ability to do that. And I did that for some time. And then when the opportunity came up to be chief of staff, like there was just absolutely no question that I should throw my hat in the ring. So you really need to surround yourself with people who are like really rooting for your path, your journey, your success, even if it takes you, away from them.
I love that. Mickey, how about you?
Yeah, I would only add to that. I'll double down on what Melissa said. I think surrounding yourself with people in your environment. I had a very similar experience at Adobe that Melissa was describing at Intel, with people who were encouraging me and really actually were supportive of that opportunity. I would suggest, if you find yourself currently in a position where that's not available to you, then LinkedIn, reaching out to your network, getting involved in extracurricular activities within your professional, in the direction you want to lead your professional growth and development. I would say lean into that, because I say LinkedIn, but these platforms provide us so much opportunity that didn't exist previously, where we can actually just say, hey, I see you do this work, tell me about that, or stay. I think there's opportunities, even if you're currently not in a position where your manager or your team is super supportive of that, getting the growth there, look for that somewhere else and feed that still.
That's great. And I'll add just to say that sometimes if it feels like the opportunities that you want actually just don't exist in your organization, but maybe for whatever circumstance you don't feel like you can move or change, you have to create moments for you to flex and do other things, right? Those are the moments when you say, okay, can I start this other program that I'm really excited about? Or can I do this thing in my personal time? Can I go be on a board? Can I join a nonprofit, right? Things that are still going to allow you to feel like you are growing and developing your career, even if maybe where you are, those opportunities don't specifically exist, right? Like you have to be in charge of creating them.
Mm-hmm.
This is a nice segue actually into sort of this, like, what do you manifest and how do you create it? And specifically, I'm going to tie that to this notion of identity, right? All of us on this panel are lawyers because we went to law school, right? But not all of us still practice law day to day. That tied with the fact that each one of us throughout our legal careers has done sometimes things that are legal, sometimes things that are not, means that like we're constantly flexing in and out of what sometimes can be established as like more rigid identities, like I am a transactional attorney, or I am a litigator, or I'm a big law attorney, or I'm an in-house lawyer, I'm a legal ops professional, or I'm chief of staff, right? Right. But the reality that we know, because we occupy so many of these spaces at once, is those boxes are fabricated sometimes, right? How have you thought about this compartmentalization in your career path, and how have you fought it? Melissa, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it was a struggle for me, Jasmine. I will say, because it's safe to have a label and a really strong professional identity, and one that's like, very easily comprehensible, and one that you can tell maybe in an elevator when you're introducing yourself to somebody and you have only a few seconds, right? It makes networking easier, and it can sometimes make career growth feel simpler because the path is just so defined, right? But I mean, I think you have to, and a lot of those that pigeonholing that happens is, like you said, it's self-limiting, right? So you're the one who's saying, well, I'm this kind of lawyer, like I haven't done that before, or I haven't, had that kind of training before, like I'm just not built for this. And it's just, I'm reminded of kind of the lessons. I have 2 young children, and I'm reminded of the lessons that they get in school all the time and that we try to reinforce at home, right? Which is like the power of yet, right? And it feels really cheesy just even saying that, but like that is a really powerful word to inject into your thinking, right? Is I haven't done it yet, but there is really no reason to limit yourself from that particular activity. And I think people think there needs to be like this long runway to reinvention, right? Like I have to get all this training and I have to start, being this kind of person who does these different things. But I mean, who you are, right? A technology lawyer, product counsel, privacy expert. It's really just a collection of the things that you do. So just start doing these things in small ways and then build confidence that you can do it. And that's going to fuel more changes in your behavior and activity. So, I mean, hopefully that was helpful. But I mean, I think once you start taking on activities and new domains and succeeding, you're going to realize that you've been limiting and pigeonholing yourself, right?
Yeah. And Mickey, I'd love to transition it to you to talk a little bit about how you personally have done that. Like, how have you thought about, I'm going to pull myself out of this compartment? Like, what skills did you leverage? What did you actually do to say, hey, I know in the past I had music licensing experience, but I can prove to you that that applies to software licensing, for example, or I can prove to you that like all of the stuff I did on the procurement side makes me the best ops person, for example, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I wish I could say that was all planned. It's easy to look back at where I've been and say this is the move, but quite frankly, I've always been attracted to people who are collaborative, who are personable, and so one of the things I learned coming out of law school into the Adobe setting, when in-house teams were actually relatively new, we honed in on that skill of it's not necessarily the subject matter of that you bring to the table. It's the collective experiences that we learned in law school. What are the facts? Analogy, like take the rules. It might not be a perfect fit rule. Do the analysis, understand the risk. And those kind of basic skills, learning to apply those basic skills are things that transfer no matter what subject you're in.
Yeah.
So that's I think how I made it. And then the other thing is, like I said, being curious, getting to know people. I think one of the superpowers I realized early on was I had a connection with my business clients. I was able to speak their language probably a little bit better than some other lawyers who just spoke law. And so I really honed in on that skill. That made me the go-to person from a client perspective. And that was something, that trust and that credibility, that is what I've learned carries over no matter which subject.
I love that. Yeah. It's sort of those fundamental core principles of like, what makes you a great lawyer? Not necessarily always your subject matter expertise, right? It is your excellent communication skills, your judgment, your curiosity, your problem solving. And then those things can actually be the skill sets that lead you to the next precipice, whatever that might be.
But it is hard. I'll just say it is hard sometimes convincing other people that you can do something just because you haven't done it before, right? Exactly. And so it is helpful, like Mickey said, you have to look at the shape of the work that you're doing, right? And break it down into what fundamental skill that it is, right? Because like I remember when I would interview and people were like, well, why are you, right? Like, what gives you the experience and the knowledge to be able to like manage this, for example, cybersecurity event, right? Like in case one arises. Well, crisis management, I mean, that's what I cut my teeth on, right? That's litigation. That's big, bet the company, commercial, antitrust litigation, communications, right? Things are happening on a global stage. I absolutely know how to do that. Right. Or, how would you be able to break down, really complicated legal ideas to, engineers or people who don't speak legal. Well, I mean, that's what we're trained to do, is like, communicate effectively. And this is the type of work that I did in my trial prep or in my trial work, right? Shape narrative. So, I mean, I think it's really, it's good exercise for you to kind of get crisp on like what the shapes of work you do look like. And then you can like use those shapes to help persuade other people that, these are similar and I can do whatever it is that you're asking me to do.
Yeah, I love that creation of your soundbite, your story, and like how it translates into what it is that you're trying to do, I think is essential to convincing people, like you said, Melissa, that just because you've never done it doesn't mean you don't know how to do it and be successful.
Right.
And on that front, though, I think every now and then we find ourselves in these positions where we're like, oh dear, I don't know what to do, or maybe I need help. I think people could benefit from hearing that, like, you have been in that position and how did you get through it? Mickey, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I have a very, very relevant story, and it happened not too many years ago. And I to chief of staff to my chief legal officer, who found herself now the head of the chief people officer. So my boss translated into the chief people officer, chief legal officer. She now inherited the HR team and a slew of kind of issues and problems that were not legal at all, but she needed some help and support. And because we had a very trusted relationship, we worked very well together. She turned to me, she says, this tool is a nightmare. I think we need to roll back this tool. We implemented a tool, it's not working. I need you to dig in and solve this problem for me. I need you to find out what's going on. I need you to put a plan to get in place to rectify. It's crisis management is what it was. Our employees were in crisis because this tool was broken. And I looked at her and I said, I have never done that before. And I just want to be very clear and transparent that that's not this particular thing I've not actually done before. So I'm going to bring to it what I know and how I know to problem solve. I might not do it in a way that HR people are used to. And she's like, I trust you. And that was it. And I used my people skills to come in to a place where nobody believed that I was credible to do this job. I was standing up, we had to replace the VP, who was originally in head of this project, and I was coming in. The deck was stacked against me. But again, she trusted me to use some of the core basic skills that she knew I could bring to the table, not necessarily the subject matter expertise. And that was a huge win for everybody. And I doubted myself every day of that project.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it really speaks to the power of those, that tangible skill set that like you have earned by way of your incredible career path and refined all of those skills over the years. And that is what allowed you to succeed, even when maybe in your mind you were like, I have no idea how to do this. Yeah. Melissa, I'd love to turn it to you to answer the same question.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the answer to the question is the work that I'm doing right now is something that I'm wholly unfamiliar with doing. And I feel like, every day I feel like, oh my gosh, I've maybe bitten off more than I can chew. And what am I going to do? And the answer is you just do it, right? You just get it done. So I lead AI innovation for our department. And at the moment, I'm focused on training and cultural change now, right? How do we drive adoption and mindset shift around our workflows? Like, how do we use AI to, increase our impact and do more, right, with less? And this is not at all my area of expertise, but this was something I was interested in and already having conversations with colleagues about. So something that I actually raised my hand for. And I think, going back to the tangible skills that you learn in practicing as a lawyer that give you, right, the foundation for being able to take on really novel, different work. I had already kind of learned to do this in the antitrust litigation work that I was doing, right? So, you dive you do a deep dive at the beginning of every case, right? It's every case is a different industry. You learn to be an expert quickly in everything about it, from the market, the product, the players, the competition. Like, you are now an expert in whatever that is. Maybe it's potatoes, maybe it's mushrooms, maybe it's binder clips, maybe it's ebooks, whatever it is, you know. So I think that litigation work really honed my capacity to learn quickly,
Yeah.
and do just these deep factual dives and become an absolute expert overnight in anything. And that's something that I wield now in order to get my arms around this this novel scope of work.
That's fantastic. That's great advice. And it's actually a perfect segue into the role that technology has played in each of your career trajectories and how maybe it has influenced your career, whether it's a push in what's happening in the legal profession or a technology that you are becoming an expert in yourself to be able to shift how you or your teams work. So, Mickey, I'd love to start with you. You mentioned a little bit about, the SaaS boom and that fueling the early part of your career. But tell me a little bit about how you have seen the various technological shifts over the years influencing your work and, maybe powering a little bit of your trajectory.
I think that's a great question. I think that I feel extremely lucky to have been in the Valley through the last several technological pushes. I think we're at the cusp of another one. But learning to adapt to, using the internet, learning to adapt, understand the risks that the technology poses to your client. Like, it's new every step of the way, whether that was putting everything in a cloud and, understanding even what a cloud was like that. I mean, all of a sudden, riding the wave of, negotiating indemnifications for access to confidential information, it's such I'm seeing the cycle repeat itself now in the AI space. And for me, that change is not something to fear. It is actually something to embrace and be like, wow, we're on another wave. We're on another cusp. What's going to be next? We don't know, but educating yourself around the technology has been key to riding those waves and understanding the risk with that technology. And so it's a difficult question to extrapolate with examples, but I see the wave. I see the cycles. We're having that knee-jerk reaction like we did with our data in a cloud to trying to protect against something we're unsure about. Really what is, but as the data was in the cloud, as security things were breached, and nowadays data breaches aren't as scary to us. We can extrapolate now what the risk is, what the cost is to mitigate, and I think we'll see the same with AI. We'll understand, we'll begin to understand, see the risks play out, and see the environment address them, and then we'll adapt. So it's extrapolating the key characteristics of those technological advances and reapplying them and understanding them and applying them to your daily work. So as Melissa said, we're driving the same thing in our ops team around AI and automation, but the principles for understanding the technology and using the technology do not change. What are your process and workflows? What is best to automate? High volume, low risk, none of that changes. The analysis doesn't change. It's just applied to a different set of facts. And that's really, that's what that's how you come out of these times of unknowns.
Yeah, I love that. And hopefully a reinforcing message for those early in practice that IRAC matters forever. We don't call it that, right? But the application of the rule to a set of facts is our entire job for the rest of our careers, and it doesn't change. And the better we can do that, I think the better and more successful we can be for our clients. And Melissa,
if you're transitioning to business, that is your key that you bring to the table, being able to do that analysis very quickly. And that's how you talk to your business clients and partners. That's what you bring. And that's not necessarily taught in business school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Melissa, you talked a little bit about the fact that you didn't have a ton of training in AI, for example, but you're now charged with leading this massive effort at Intel. And the fact that like what had prepared you for that is the fact that you are a consummate learner. And by way of being a litigator, you have this very well honed skill set of learning things quickly, being able to action around them and be a subject matter expert. So, if you can draw that parallel out for folks just a little bit much or a little bit more of like how have you directly found success in your most recent efforts around AI and, implementing various work streams for supporting your team when maybe you weren't always an expert in what that technology actually did?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thread here is just continuous learning, right? I mean, I think you continuous learning and in focusing on that in your career is just what's going to keep you adaptable and flexible, even as like the technology or the mission or the problem that you're trying to solve like changes, right? So I think, similar to Mickey, I was watching technology change the shape of my litigation work, right? So I was litigating during a time of, the rise of the app stores and walled gardens, and what does this mean for competition, and Uber, right, and the rise of the gig economy, and what does that mean? So you're seeing technology be really disruptive, and at every point in time, you just have to be, like, this is your new normal now. Go figure it out. Like, you have to immerse yourself in learning about it so that you can now be, give good advice around it and speak the same language as the people who you're advising. I think it's really about that. Continuous learning and focusing on that, and so yeah, just embrace it. And now that my the problems that I'm trying to solve now are a little bit different, but it's still the same fundamental, like, get to know everything about about the technology and the landscape of it, right? So the problems that I'm tasked with solving now are more about, like, how do we upskill and train our department, making sure that everyone is able to leverage the technology and be AI confident. How do we reduce the cost pressures that our legal department faces, right? Like, outside counsel fees are rising, our budgets are not rising in parallel, right? So, like, how do we reduce those pressures on our department? It's a very different problem, but the approach to it is really similar.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. We've gotten a number of questions submitted via the Q&A, so I'm going to move to those just because I think they're great questions. And one of them is, have either of you experienced any setbacks or tough moments in your professional journey, and what did you learn from them? Mickey, if you could start.
100%, always. One of the early in my career, I saw the tough moments as not being able to influence, those around me to see the job that I was doing to warrant that promotion. And at the time, I was chasing the vertical side. And somebody sat down, and this is where I kind of learned, looking not just vertically, but horizontally. I'd say I didn't get the promotion. I had a really great year. I thought I'm not going to be able to repeat this year. But just sometimes the negatives force you to think differently and do differently. And I would say embrace those. What seem like setbacks are really actually just part of the journey, and give yourself space to feel disappointed or rejected or, but then, then say, okay, like, what am I going to, like, show up again next time? How am I going to bounce back from this? I think, I speak very kind of holistically, but every disappointment is not necessarily a setback. It could just be the rung in the place that you actually need to go. Didn't get that job, didn't get that opportunity, didn't get this, was told no. Like, all of that is part of the journey. It's how you respond and show up after that. It's that helps you move on from that.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I say is every fall creates a chance to rise again, right? And without that, it's really hard to find the backup
and it's not easy to remember that in the moment of disappointment and rejection and hurt. And so give yourself some grace to feel that, but
Yeah.
also know that you have the full control to change the circumstance.
That's fantastic. Melissa, I'm going to switch a little bit to another question that we received for you, which is, someone said that they have a real desire to make a difference and drive change, but they're not always a part of the executive conversations or the cross-functional conversations where they feel like they can make that impact. How do you accomplish that, desire to drive change if maybe you aren't in the room where it's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a reality that you're not going to be in every executive conversation that shapes outcomes, right? So where you want to be is you want to be influencing what gets surfaced, what gets framed, right? So if you think about your role then as not just like the decider, the people who are in the room having those conversations, but now maybe you're a signal amplifier, right? You're elevating what leadership should be thinking about. You're hearing these things and these signals, and now you're saying like these are issues that we need to address right now, right? Or maybe you're translating, you're connecting business priorities with legal implications, okay? Or you're aligning cross-functional stakeholders, right? You're seen as the person who's like, hey, I know how to solve this problem because I can bring all of these different people together and they all have a say in how this problem gets solved, right? So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can start helping to shape those outcomes by influencing the inputs that executives get. Like, I think most executives are they're drowning in inputs. And so if you can be a person who is like framing an issue clearly and you're moving things forward and you're giving the right visibility to the right things, then you become indispensable. And it's that indispensable like nature that really grants you access.
I love that. I love that. And it nicely ties back to something you said earlier, Mickey, about the communication and the benefit of that communication. And one of the questions we received is actually, how do you build credibility with your either executives or cross-functional partners when maybe you don't speak each other's language very well? How do you start to become seen as a strategic thought partner? How do you go down the path of speaking the language of business, for example, as you mentioned?
Well, for me, the speaking the language of the business is really driving change, being strategic. You have to speak the language of the business. You have to meet them where they are, which means you have to talk about things that are important to them and learning what's important to them to change. And that might not always align with what you think needs to be changed. And so you have to learn to kind of parse through the impact you want to make and make sure that it aligns with your business strategy, your executive goals, but I would say that you don't just start by being strategic. You have to actually start small. And starting small means looking to your inner environment, what you can control in terms of change and being strategic. And it might just mean that if you're not influencing the executives, you're influencing your manager, you're influencing your colleagues. Starting with that and building up and out, pretty soon your relationships will get stronger, the trust will be there, and the credibility will be there. And people will start talking about you when you're not in the room. And really has to start with the small changes you do every day to influence change and strategy. And it might just be with one person, then two people. And so don't think big and become overwhelmed. Think small and build out.
Yeah, I love that.
Can I add to that? Can I just add to that? I mean, I think the speaking business and getting that credibility that you know how to speak business is such a key shift when you're going from, a firm to in-house. So for anyone who is, thinking about making that move, it is a totally different way of like framing the issues and what you're talking about. Because if you're outside counsel, you are talking to in-house lawyers. It's still lawyer to lawyer speak, right? So, you're gonna, they're asking you about this exclusivity deal or this rebate program that they're rolling out. Maybe you start talking about like, well, the Sherman Act says and the Cartwright Act, but that is absolutely not how you meet the business, right? Yeah. Like it's what Mickey said. It's like, hey, what are you trying to do? Like, what's the strategy? What is blocking you right now? And how can I help? right?
Yeah.
You have to meet them. You're not going to get anywhere with legalese.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing that I had to reframe and relearn for myself, in terms of like communications, right, and
Yeah.
getting things done.
Yeah, I love that. It actually makes me remember a moment very early on in my in-house career. Our legal team was going around the room and saying like, okay, here, everyone's sort of giving like top level what they're working on. And I had described, I was on some procurement deals and I had described some like legal issues with like, oh my gosh, they want uncapped or they want, capped indemnities for blah, blah, blah. This is a service that they provide. And my manager afterwards was like, nobody cares, Jasmine. Nobody cares about the uncapped or capped indemnities. Like they care what the company is buying and what we're going to do with that service. So the way you lead that conversation is you say, the so-and-so department is procuring services from so-and-so company in order to help the company do XYZ. And, the risk associated is blah, the objective is blah. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, thank you so much. But it took that shift, right? Because I had been going from as outside counsel, especially lawyer to lawyer for so long that it was the reframing that made all the difference. You both have talked a lot about the specific skills and experiences that I think have been critical to your progression. And what I'm abstracting out is like curiosity, communication, trust, and your ability to build trust have been so essential. But the part 2 of the question that we got around what skills have been essential is, how do you actually go develop those skills? Like, what do you do in your career to progress down the path of becoming a better communicator, of becoming someone who can build trust very quickly? And so I think, the question asker likely could use the very granular advice of like, what do I do to develop these specific skill sets?
I would say that get comfortable asking for feedback.
Great.
Ask for feedback to people that you trust, then build out from there. Feedback is a gift. It sometimes stings, of course, because you thought you were communicating one way and to learn that you're not, but request the feedback, request it of your manager, request it of your colleagues. Most companies have a formalized way of requesting feedback, or at least some do. If not, do it informally. Ask your manager to do it anonymously. Like we don't learn unless we're told how to improve. Like that's, to me, been the key. And so finding space for feedback.
I love that. Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to relationships and I think it's really important to grow your network, not just for the sake of the relationships, but also it's really important. Like if you're trying to do a thing, you don't really know what good looks like. Expose yourself to what good looks like, right? Like grow your network, see people who are doing the things that you think are terrific, and then talk to them, have one-on-ones with them, look at their interviews, look at their work product, try like imitation, right? What is it? Imitation is the best form of flattery or something, but like you need to see what good looks like, and then you can start practicing that as well. Like this is what a good communication looks like. This is a great deck for the board. Like this is what a great email to the CLO looks like, right? Like it, by the way, it should be very short, only on one screen of an iPhone. Don't scroll to read your message, because they won't. But like go find what good looks like and then just start practicing it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. We've got a few non-lawyers who are still legal professionals, right, on this call. And a question from them is, how should non-lawyers think about their career progression in the legal field? Specifically, one question was, should I just go get a JD in order to be able to rise through and become more senior in the ways that I want? Or you see other paths or opportunities for them to become senior in orgs in the legal profession without necessarily being practicing attorneys? Melissa, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think that you need a JD at all in order to do it. I think it's important to help understand how lawyers, how they think, right? That IRAC, right? Like what and the risk aversion and the kind of like data that they need in order to make decisions. Like just like lawyers need to learn business speak in order to speak to business people. You know, if you're a non-lawyer coming into a legal environment and wanting to rise, like, you need to understand what makes lawyers tick, like what keeps us up at night, like how are we going to talk, how do we approach, why do we focus on all the things we don't know all the time, right? And so learn that lawyer speak. And, you know, I mean, I think there are some things that lawyers are not particularly good at, right? Like, I think we're never really taught, like, you know, project management on large scale things. Like, we really need people who can help us, like, you know, like man the beachhead, right? And I think like those are great places where folks who are not lawyers can add just a ton of value, is like helping to like master the chaos and drive things forward in a disciplined manner. Like, that wasn't a part of my legal training per se. So I mean, I think it's just yeah, I think there's great opportunity for growth in the legal field for non-lawyers.
Yeah. Mickey, anything to add?
Yeah, no, doubling down on that, I would say, just kind of extrapolating what Melissa said, is like filling the cracks in the gap where lawyers don't live. Lawyers do not understand tool implementations. They don't understand, most of them can't read a profits and loss statement. Most of them can't read, can't project manage. That's not to say that they wouldn't be good candidates to do that, because I've been able to translate that. But that the tool aspect of the way we work right now is not something that lawyers are good at understanding. And you can be the conduit between the people who need to use the tool and the people who in the IT department who are actually rolling the tool out. Speaking doing big business requirements documents, explaining to the lawyers what that is and why it's important. Like, there's a whole gap. There's lots of gaps. Just running the business of legal is not necessarily something lawyers do. And it depends on the maturity of the legal department. If they're just a few lawyers, then they're being asked to project manage and run all these things. And maybe you lean into those spaces where they just maybe don't want to be.
Yeah. Both great answers. Okay. We are nearing the end of our time together. So I've got a few final questions for you both. One looking back, one looking forward. So looking back, what is some advice that you would give yourself if you went back to the very early days of your career? Melissa, we'll start with you.
Early advice, like, I would say nothing is permanent, right? So not your success and not your failures. So like, keep building the profession and the career and the life that you want. I would also say, like, fail fast, right? Like, if I were to go back when I was practicing in my first 2 to 3 to 5 years, like, be bold, fail fast, get all of those mistakes, right, like, out of the way, so that, you can do it right when the stakes are really high and really matter, but you're also exercising that muscle of experimentation, right? Which I think as lawyers, you lose very quickly later in later stages in your career. So like, build that early on, be bold, fail fast.
Yeah, love that. Mickey?
I'm just going to double down on something Melissa said earlier: continuous learning and network.
Yeah.
Network.
Yeah.
I got so early in my career, I was too much in my head and just heads down and, trying to get up that ladder, and the networking, that's a skill you have to build, and you can't build it without practicing.
Yeah. Okay. And now looking forward, I'd love to hear what each of you are prioritizing this year in terms of your professional growth. What are you thinking about? What are you working on? Mickey, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm struggling to find that space to give me time to think about what my next is. And so I keep going back to, I love the idea of the list. What do I like to do? What do I enjoy doing? Or what's my superpower? How do I blend it? So right now I really am fighting for that time and space to think about what my next is. And then there's personal environmental factors that go into that. My kids are older, they're grown. Like, I'm entering a new phase of my personal life. Like, what does that look like for me? Stay tuned.
Yes. Melissa, how about you?
Yeah, my focus this year is really on, the AI innovation and training piece for my department and learning everything that I can in this space, just throwing myself into it. So that is kind of my singular goal for the year.
That's fantastic. Mickey, Melissa, thank you both so much for joining us today. And to all the attendees, thanks for spending this last hour with us. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, and we hope to see you another time soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.